Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to make, that was my cat. Today we're going to make something for New Year's. I know it's pretty close already, but I didn't have my timing figured out, so I'm sorry for that. But generally you can use that for any like sort of event or anything that is a bit more elegant anyways, so it's not technically New Year's formal wear, but just like formal wear. I wanted to make this dress right here, which is from James Bond. It's actually from James Bond Spectre, which I had to look up because I'm not a James Bond fan. Like it's not my kind of genre, so I haven't watched the movie, and it's like I'm not into action movies basically. But a friend of mine sent this picture to me and was like, this looks amazing, maybe it's something that you'd like to make in the future. Which she was right, because it looks really nice. The dress is actually worn by Lea Seydoux, so she's French, she's from Paris. I hope that I'm pronouncing this name correctly, because it's been a few years and my French, my school French is rusty, I guess. But Lea Seydoux is rocking that dress and it looks amazing on her. It has this amazing draping in the back, which makes it super elegant and luxurious, and it's gonna be fun to figure out how the pattern for that works. I have an idea because it looks to me like it's cut on the bias, like the whole dress is, by the way. But I've done something like that already for my cowl neck top Miriam, so I know somewhat how it works, but it's gonna be interesting to find out the exact pattern because it's also, you know, going into the shoulders and the armhole cutout area. So we're gonna find that out together. I'm really excited for that. It seems like she is wearing a silk satin, which I don't have at the moment, and I will not purchase because it's just super expensive. It's like 40 euros per meter, and I think this dress is gonna take about like 3 to 4 meters, so I'm not gonna spend that money on silk. I have alternatives. I have a cotton satin and a synthetic satin, so both are available to me at the moment. I think it will be the synthetic fabric, even though I really don't like working with synthetics, but for the sake of the look, I think I have to. Hi, I'm currently editing and I did not think about that. Also, can we appreciate my good hair day? What's up with this? Anyways, I wasn't thinking about that. The best solution would have been a rayon satin or anything similar like that, because it would have had the same flowy texture like a silk. Cotton is way too thick and polyester was the only thing that I had at hand without having to spend any more money. But in hindsight, I should have probably just gone out and purchased a rayon or a viscose satin, because it is a cellulose fiber. It is made from trees basically, so it's not synthetic, even though it is made in a synthetic way, if that makes sense. It's made from cellulose pulp, which is gathered from cellulose materials such as trees. But I don't know why I wasn't thinking about that. But if you can, try to reduce your usage of synthetic materials, at least that's my opinion, and go for natural sources, I guess. That the whole dress is cut on the bias. You can see the waves of the silk basically draping around her body, and you can see how the fabric behaves. That's because it's a very, you know, soft and flowy material, whereas, for example, cotton satin is very stiff and would not do that. It's very stiff and thick. Even though it looks amazing, it's just not suitable for this type of dress. So I think I have to resort to use my synthetic satin that I have here as well, which is the most similar that I can get at the moment, but it's better than the cotton because the cotton is just really thick. I've worked with cotton satin. That's actually cotton duchess satin, cotton duchesse satin, whatever, which I used for this video and this video, so you can check both of these out. They're pretty early on my YouTube journey, I guess, so bear with me. But you can see in these videos as well how the fabric behaves, and it's pretty stiff and just not suitable for this kind of dress. So a lot of people always ask me how I digitize my patterns. I made a video about this already, so you can click up here and watch it, but I'm gonna show you again how that's done for everybody who, you know, wants to revisit it. So I have my base block right here. It's front, back and sleeve pattern. These have been fitted to my body, which is my basic standard S size. So these will fit perfectly according to the measurements, and they have been adjusted and everything fitted. So I can go ahead and take a picture of all of these pattern pieces and airdrop them to my computer and then go from there. So now that I have the picture on my computer, I can actually go ahead and put some measurements in. So for this you'll always need your original base block at hand and of course a measuring tape. So I'm going to go ahead and measure some distinctive lines on my pattern, for example the center front, which is 79 centimeters. And I can go ahead and make a line that measures 79 centimeters. Which I then use to scale my patterns accordingly. So obviously you want to have them to be the same size as the paper patterns. And I use a bunch of different measurements that I just measure and then check if they do measure the same on the computer. And here you can already see me doing the modeled pattern actually. I'm switching between the picture and my pattern draft to see if everything is correct and can go from there. Okay, so I finished the mock-up right now. And from the looks of it, it looks pretty similar to the original. I have a few things that I want to change though. First off, I made the side seam a tiny bit smaller, actually not a tiny bit, pretty much. Like this is probably 5 centimeters on each side, so 10 centimeters in total, which is a lot. But that is due to the fact that this pattern, the base block that I made this pattern from, has sleeves, and I personally just hate if you can't move your arms because that's ridiculous. Therefore, I have a lot of width in the bust area right here so you can lift your arms. So that's on purpose that it doesn't fit, but since this dress won't have any sleeves, this is unnecessary and you need to take out the amount that you put in before. So in my case, this is pretty much like 10 centimeters, give or take. And I have something that I want to change here in the seam, because this is basically going exactly the other way around that I would like the bust area with the ruffles to go. So I'm just gonna draw in a rough shape of where I would like the seam to be. Something like this I think would look better than the other way around. I maybe want to take out a tiny bit in here, like maybe just a centimeter. And then generally I would like the pattern to be a tiny bit wider. So I made this pattern with the idea of everything being on the bias. I also cut out the mock-up fabric on the bias, so it has a tiny bit of stretch, but it doesn't have enough stretch. So I was basically gambling while making the pattern that the fabric would stretch a bit more. Now, since this is not really, like, not even close to my fabric that I'll be using this fabric right here. You can't really rely on the stretch of this fabric being on the bias. So you kind of have to, you know, like, use this here as a guide rather than this here, but they seem to be somewhat similar. I mean, this fabric is a bit more stretchy, if you can say that, if it lays on the bias, because also the weave is different to this one. This is a basic canvas weave, and this one is a more intricate one. Not sure what the name is in English. But anyways, so whatever, this needs to be a bit wider, because I had it on yesterday with some tights, so it's not 100%, but it was too tight and I didn't like it, how it fit. So I definitely have to just make it bigger. I think I'm gonna put overall 4 centimeters into the skirt so that it's, you know, nicely fit it on my body and not too tight. And since this fabric has a lot of weight, it's just gonna, you know, drape around me and like kind of fall down and not stand like this fabric right here. This is a big minus for this mock-up fabric. It's pretty like stiff. I also want to take out a tiny bit on this line right here because it's just a bit too round, and as we all know, the roundness happens in the back. And this is going to be a pretty easy fix. Since I took out something here anyways because of the waist dart, I can just elongate the curve and make the curve a bit not as round. At the moment it's like pretty much like this, and the other side is also like this, and now I'm gonna make it go a bit more like this. Anyways, the other thing is the draping in the back. So from your point of view, it actually looks quite nice, to be honest, but I have a few things to say. Also, again, this is not a reliable mock-up. I was even thinking about cutting out at least the draping part, and I might still do that, out of the original fabric just to see how it actually will fall. Because in my opinion, it looks quite nice. Like, from the back it looks like the original, to be honest. From the side it looks a bit weird. So keep in mind I already took some length out since I took out something in the side seam, but I think I also need to take out, like in the center right here, maybe like 5 centimeters or 6 or 7 even, just in the center back, and like put it more together, because maybe it also drapes down too low. Maybe it needs to be like this and a bit more like on the body. But generally how I made this worked quite well. So you can see it right here. See how this fold, just it makes this fold. It's because this is going out too much. So you essentially have to kind of make this seam right here more or less bodycon, honestly, so that this fold doesn't happen. So you have to take out even more than 7 centimeters. This is probably like double. I don't know, I marked it so I can measure it later on. But essentially that's what's doing the fold right here. Maybe I also have to do like a more diagonal line. And then maybe only take out 10 centimeters up here, I don't know, and down there 15 or something, not sure. So you see this, and then also this needs to be taken out, maybe, hopefully, I don't know. But apart from that, it works quite well. I might have to, you know, sew the draping on here, who knows. But that's the pattern, and it works really well with the adjustments, so great.
As I mentioned before, I wasn't really happy with the mock-up fabric in the draped back, which is why I did a few changes to the pattern and then decided to do another fitting in the actual satin fabric that I chose to make this dress out of. The only thing to sew in the draping is the lower seam, at least that's what I called it in the pattern. It's always fun to make up names for seams that aren't conventionally used, and then also in your second language. But anyways, I just put right sides together and sew the lower seam together. After backstitching the seam, I turned it right sides out and pinned it to the old mock-up dress.
Okay, I just put it on and look at it. It looks perfect. The folds are gone here. It lays perfectly on the body. It makes a really nice fold in here. It doesn't awkwardly stand like the mock-up fabric did. It's just perfect. I'm super happy that that worked out. I did not know if I did it correctly, if my changes, you know, did the changes that I wanted it to do, but look at it, it's just perfect. This is so cool. I am super happy. Okay, I guess I can print out my pattern and cut it out of my fashion fabric and make this dress.
So as I said in the very beginning when I was analyzing the original dress a bit, all skirt pattern pieces are cut out on the bias. This is super important as it gives the dress this flowy, drapey look which we're going for. My fabric is a standard 140 centimeters wide fabric and folded in half measures 70 centimeters. My pattern pieces are a tiny bit too long to perfectly fit on a 45-degree angle onto the fabric if I fold it lengthwise, which is why I just tilted the pattern pieces enough to fit onto the 70 centimeters of my folded fabric. It worked out fine for me, but as every fabric behaves differently, I wanted to add this info. For this pattern, also due to the pattern pieces laying on the bias, it is super important to make a mock-up. Your dress might fit differently on your body depending on what fabric you're using. Not only like if you're using satin or no satin, it also comes down to fiber material, weight, etc. We're going to start off with the draping in the back, which I already sewed together for the test fit that I did. The back is divided in the center back seam, which is I'm going to sew together next. On screen you can see version 1 of my pattern. I adjusted the pattern more after I was done and changed the back to just look better in the end. You're going to have a full back with the armholes and shoulders and all, just so that you know. The center back seam gets overlocked. Alternatively, you can of course also do nicer finishes of the seams. For example, French seams would look really good in this, but I was short on time and didn't think about it earlier because you have to add a little bit more seam allowance to that, so I just ended up overlocking everything. After that, I just iron my seam allowance to either side, doesn't matter. Just be careful as it lays on the bias that you are ironing with the grain to prevent stretching the center back seam or any seam for that matter out. Before sewing any seams in my pattern pieces, I actually make sure to iron everything nice and flat. Here you can also see how I am ironing with the grain, which is super important to not stretch anything out. I then prepare the front of the dress. I take the front and side front pieces and put right sides together to close the front dividing seams. In the left seam, I'm going to put a slit in, which is why I'm only closing the seam until the slit notch in the pattern. The right seam gets sewn all the way. I overlock both seams and iron the seam allowance towards the side seam. For the slit edges, I'm folding the seam allowance inwards twice, which hides the raw edges. Make sure to only fold as far in as your front dividing seam goes, like the one where it stops for the slit. So basically you have 1 centimeter to fold inwards twice, meaning you need to fold the edges 5 millimeters. Pin both sides in place and give it a good iron. I kinda did not a good job showing you how the slit actually works in the dress itself, which is why I am showing you a reel that I filmed for my Instagram later on. But basically it shows exactly the same technique that I was using for the dress itself. The only difference is that the dress is laying on the bias, which I forgot to do so here in the slit as well. But basically it's the same thing. If you want to see more small tutorials, small films like this, go ahead and check out my Instagram, because that is what I am mainly doing. I am giving you a lot of tips and tricks on how to sew and like these small kind of hacks on how to sew different things. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and follow my Instagram. I am uploading new videos just like that, new hacks every other day. So back to the slit. For me, it was the easiest to pin on my ironing surface itself, which allowed me to fasten the slit and then press it with my iron and then actually pin it in place to take it over to my sewing machine. This way the folds stay in place and you'll have a much easier time sewing the slit. I then sew along the edge of a fold right where the folds stop. I go over in a 90-degree angle, turn and like kind of backstitch over the actual front dividing seam, turn another 90 degrees to go back down towards the hem, also very closely to the fold of your folded edges basically. That's how the slit is going to end up looking. I give it another press just to get rid of the indents that I just pressed before into the fabric. And yeah, that's another way of making slits. I don't know how many I have left, but I've done a couple of reels about slits, so you should know how to make a variety of slits if you watched everything. And here's the result of the actual dress. As you can see, it looks the same. Just be careful with ironing to not stretch the seam. The upper front piece has two gathered sections in the dividing seam there, which I'm putting in next. In the pattern, you're gonna find notches that say gather between these points, which is exactly what we're gonna do. I sew into my seam allowance with my biggest stitch length once, then at the notch I turn my piece, put the needle down about 2 millimeters next to my previous seam and go back to the other notch. I only sew into the seam allowance and I am not back tacking anywhere. This is a small little hack as you won't have to knot anything. You can just drawstring bag style, pull on both bobbin threads together, and that's literally it. Once done with that, I can now put the upper front seam together. I put right sides of the upper front and the prepared skirt part together and make sure to match up all notches in my pieces. Make sure to find the notches in the middle of the gathered sections, as these ones are kinda hidden now, but pretty important to get two parallel sides. And now you can see why it's super important to only put the gathering stitches into your seam allowance, as we're gonna sew right next to them to hide everything and to put obviously the two pieces together. Here's a decision that you'll have to make. In the facing of the pattern, you're gonna find a gray line that indicates a half facing version. If you're choosing the half facing, overlock the upper front seam now and then iron it up into the upper front. Continuing on with the back piece, again, I'm working with version 1 of the pattern. Yours will look better. So put the back piece right side facing up in front of you and pin the draping onto the shoulder seam, the armhole cutout, and the small section of side seam it has. You then want to top stitch the draping onto the back piece just into the seam allowance, so just at around 5 millimeters to fix it together with the back piece. We're now going to use this as kind of one piece to put everything else together. You can see me here kind of like trying to fix how the cutout of the back doesn't really work together with the draping. Don't worry, this is fixed for your pattern, but it was just such a weird moment for me to put all this work in and then just see how the draping didn't cover the back cutout. I don't know, whatever, it's changed, so you're good to go. When putting the front and back pieces together, make sure to leave the left side seam open until the zipper notch and only sew from there down to the hem. The right side seam can be closed all the way. Also overlock both of the seams. Another thing is the shoulders. I am explaining that in detail in the sewing instructions, of course, that come with this pattern, but I wanted to point it out here as well. As the draping is folded on one side, it is 1 centimeter shorter than the shoulder seam itself. Pin the draping 1 centimeter inwards accordingly to have a nice finish. Don't stretch it all the way, just measure 1 centimeter in for the next seam allowance of your back and front neckline and sew the shoulder seams together. Iron all of your seam allowances towards the back, and we can continue with the zipper. Pin in one side of your inseam zipper and give the zipper band just a tiny bit more fabric, like don't match both sides up. This is because the dress is on the bias and therefore it's stretchy, whereas the zipper band isn't. This will prevent a wobbly zipper in the end. Another hack for inseam zippers is marking specific points on the band from one side and transferring them to the other. I like to do that with pins, and I like to mark any seams along the way, the upper edge and the point the seam starts at the bottom. Then I can pin the band in exactly to mirror the first band. I then also sew the band in with my zipper foot, and the result most of the time look perfect. If not, I can always go in and change it again. Onto the facings. By now you should have decided which facing you want for your dress. Might look different, pattern version 1, you get it. If you choose the full facing, gather the lower seam exactly as you did the upper front piece before. Then you can put back facing and front facing together as I'm showing you here. I'll explain in just a second. If you choose the half facing, you don't have to do anything differently and can continue putting the facings together. You want to sew the right side seam of your facing together and the shoulder seams. Iron all seam allowances towards the back. For the half facing version, overlock the lower edge as you're finished. Don't do any bulky edge finishes as it will show on the right side. Best is just to overlock. Now you want to pin the neckline of your dress right sides together with the facing. Yours should end up being a full circle as your back facing also lays on fold. Due to how the facing is constructed, you should find your facing being a tiny bit smaller than your outer shell. Just ease the two pieces together and sew all around your neckline. As the neckline is a round shape, helping it lay flat is most of the time a good idea. You do that by cutting into the seam allowance towards your stitches about 1 centimeter apart. This releases the tension on the outer corner of your seam allowance that might bulk up on the inside in the end. You can then continue to backstitch your seam allowance onto the facing and iron the seam so that the ditch is only visible on the facing side. All of these actions that I just showed you will help your dress actually lay perfectly. So normally, I don't know if you notice it, with a few clothes that your facing kind of bulks out to be visible on the outside. That is most of the time either because they didn't backstitch the facing seam allowance or because the pattern was incorrect and the facing wasn't small enough. So that's two things that you can do to prevent this. Finishing the armhole is a bit more advanced, not because of any different techniques, but because it's just such a tiny space to work with. I found it's easiest to start from the underarm point where the side seam meets the armhole. Go in between your facing and the outer shell and pull both layers out, put right sides together and pin your way up towards the shoulders as far as you can. For the armhole finish, you will have to sew in 2 sections. If you do it in one, you will not be able to turn your piece back right sides out. It is impossible. This is a common mistake made by so many people, so don't worry if you also made this mistake. Here you go, fair warning, or your information, I guess, to avoid this mistake. Then you can continue to sew down the pinned section of your armhole. Just make sure while sewing to not catch any of the inside layers that are just bulked up in between there, because that's just extra work. We don't need that. Just sew as far as you possibly can, as comfortable you are, I guess, and then the rest, once you turn everything back right sides out, you will have to hand sew later on. For the zipper side, open the zipper and put right sides of your zipper band together with the small section of side seam on your facing. Then after the corner, the 90-degree turn, when you enter the armhole seam, work your way up the same way as for the other side that didn't have the zipper.
I think this is the most, I hate this so much. I've always hated it, having a facing on something that is sleeveless. Because it is so much trouble. And having an extra layer here all the time in my way, you literally cannot iron. It's horrible. And still, you're gonna have to hand sew something because you literally cannot reach it. Anyways, next sleeve. It's, by the way, 6:45. I have to finish this today, because we're gonna shoot it tomorrow.
Yeah, I was visibly frustrated at that point with the dress because it's always these small details at the end that make the progress so unbelievably slow that, at least for me, I fall into this negative finishing mode. There are two, negative and positive, but this one was the negative one. I have to continue working because I have a deadline that was literally in a few hours, but it's not really fun anymore, and then I just do something along the way sloppy. In this case, it was filming, so I'm so sorry about that, but I'll try my best to actually explain what I'm doing. I managed to sew the armhole with just a tiny opening, which I'm now preparing for hand sewing. I just turned both seam allowances inwards, also cut into it to release the tension of the curve, and invisibly stitched the seam close in the very end. I'm just preparing at the moment because I need to finish the facing still, which is now just hanging on the inside there. If you chose the half facing, the easier option as previously mentioned, you're done. Nothing more to do to the facing. If you chose the full facing, you now have to pin the facing on top of the upper front seam. I'm showing an option that has no top stitches visible in the end, comparable to sewing the lining of a coat or the skirt I did last. So I am putting right sides of the upper front seam and the facing together. I then pin as far in the front as possible to sew by machine. I will have to close the remaining opening by hand, which I use basically to pull everything out to work with, as well as the hem in the back facing with a slip stitch in the back. There is no seam in the final version that you have, so you will have to hand sew your facing with a slip stitch or any other kind of stitch that you like to the outer shell. Just be aware that the draping will kind of drape over it, so you're good to go. And the last step is, after hand sewing everything is complete, to hem, of course, your dress. I forgot to film that in the height of the moment, but you basically just have to turn your hem just as we did with your slit, twice 5mm inwards, and then top stitch it, or hem it however you want to hem your dress. There are so many options that you can, watch tutorials on, or whatever you're comfortable with. And Fuji's helping me here. Yeah, that's the dress. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you're following me on my Insta, you know that I was not happy at all with the outcome of this video. Not per se the dress. The dress is fine. Just the video itself, I just wasn't happy with how I filmed stuff, that I didn't film some parts and so on, which is why over Christmas there wasn't a video coming, which screwed up my time plan, but it is what it is. We are here right now, and the video is, I think at least, not as bad as I thought it would be. So I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I actually checked out my analytics, and it says that 60% of my audience is actually subscribed to me. So do me a favor and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Check if that subscribe button is still red. If yes, click on it and ring the bell to get notified every time that I post. This would be the easiest way to support me. Interact with this video, like it, comment on it, share it to your friends and family. Anything that you can do would help me out so much. So thank you so much to you guys. If you want to support me in the most direct way, check out the links down in the description below to my Etsy shop. You can get this pattern and so many more that I am showing on my YouTube channel to make for yourself at home. Check out my social media. I am uploading many sewing hacks amongst other things, but mainly that on my Instagram, and I recently revived my TikTok as well, so I am uploading daily on both platforms. So if you haven't already, go and follow me there. And yeah, that's it. I'm gonna see you next week. Thank you so much for watching. Bye guys!